Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories podcast, The Hunter's Brief, the quickly rundown where we keep one boot in the real world and one boot in the mud, because somebody always parked a truck a little too close to camp. I'm Michael, and this one's for the week ending in February 27th. Today we're hitting the new would-be BLM boss and what their confirmation hearing signals for public lands, California lawmakers flirting with grizzly bear reintroduction, and Idaho's plan to move or remove nearly 100 elk that are turning farmland into an all-you-can-eat salad bar. Then we've got a few fast movers, the DOI's big NEPA procedural overhaul, corner crossing in Wyoming with a fresh twist, wolf depredation dollars in Colorado, Catalina Island deer eradication plan, and a couple, you can't make this up, wildlife law stories to keep things spicy. All right, guys, let's kick this thing off. Let's get your coffee topped off, knife sharp, ethics intact, and let's roll. The Department of the Interior finalized a sweeping update to its NEPA implementing procedures, with reporting describing the move as rescinding a large chunk of prior DOI NEPA regulations and shifting much of the guidance into non-binding departmental manuals. Why does this matter for hunters, you might ask? Well, it isn't ideological, it's practical. NEPA is the main how we decide, in quotes, process for a lot of projects on federal land, from road building to habitat work to energy development. Faster reviews can mean quicker action, but it also can mean less time to catch problems before it hits fish, wildlife, and access. Supporters argue streamlining cuts years of delay and gets work done, especially around infrastructure and permitting. Critics, however, argue it reduces public input and increases legal risk if reviews are too thin. Hunters tend to get squeezed when projects go sideways. Habitat gets fragmented, access gets messy, and the public comment window closes before you even hear about it. NEPA is like your buddy's checklist, annoying until the one time it keeps you from leaving camp without the coffee. President Trump's nominee to lead the Bureau of Land Management, former Rep. Steve Pearce, testified in a Senate confirmation hearing this week and faced pointed questions about his public lands record and past statements. BLM is a big steering wheel for a huge chunk of the West. Energy, grazing, recreation access, and the policies that decide whether conservation is treated like real use of the land or an afterthought. Environmental groups have opposed the nomination and raised concerns about his approach to public lands. Industry groups, including energy advocates, are supporting him and framing the choice as restoring balanced multiple use and expanding access. Also, in the background, the Department of the Interior previously proposed rescinding BLM's public land rule, conservation-focused framework, so when whoever runs the BLM will be central to what happens next. The BLM leadership shapes the rules of the road. Travel plans, habitat decisions, leasing, and how hard the agency leans into conservation versus the alternative, which is development. If you hunt the West, this is one of those slow news stories that becomes fast consequences. New boss at BLM? Cool. Let's hope he can find the access map without needing a compass, a lawyer, and 3 apps. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced over $1.2 billion in wildlife and sport fish restoration apportionments, that's a tough word, from the Pittman, Robertson, and Dingell Johnson money that are headed straight to the states and territories for conservation access and outdoor opportunity work. This is one of the cleanest hunters paid for this stories out there. Equipment taxes flowing back into habitat, biologists, shooting ranges, access work, and more. Whether you're chasing elk, turkeys, or walleye, this funding is the invisible scaffolding holding up state management. If conservation had a tip jar, this is the receipt. California is debating SB 1305, a proposal that would require the state wildlife department to develop a public roadmap for potential grizzly bear reintroduction built around scientific assessment, consultation with California tribes, and feasibility work. Important nuance, this is not release bears next week. It's a do the homework and publish the plan step by step. And it's still a big deal, because once a roadmap exists, policy momentum tends to follow. Supporters frame it as restoring ecological function and cultural significance, especially since the grizzly is literally on the state flag. Opponents argue California already struggles with existing human-wildlife conflict and that adding another apex predator is irresponsible. This matters for hunters because if this ever moves from paper to practice, it's a decades-long management commitment, conflict prevention, livestock depredation policy, public safety protocols, and likely major federal coordination depending on where bears come from and what legal statuses apply. California bringing back grizzlies, it's a bold move. That's like deciding to spice up dinner by adding a chainsaw to the kitchen. Hey hunters, have you ever had one of those stories, the ones that you didn't want to tell, the ones that end in failure? Yeah, I've been there. Actually, you know what? The culprit for me usually is bad optics, or worse, lack of using my optics at all. Picture this. I spot a trophy buck, or an antelope, or an elk, whatever it may be. My heart is racing, but the blurry view, or I just can't quite identify exactly what I'm looking at, it has me second guessing. Well, that's where Vortex Optics comes in. With crystal clear glass and rugged durability, Vortex gives you the confidence to take the shot. Don't let poor optics ruin your story. Make every moment count. Upgrade to Vortex and turn your hunting tales into triumphs. Visit vortexoptics.com today.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Have you ever glassed a ridge for an hour and realized you're basically staring at a rock? You've earned a great cup of coffee. And if you've ever chased big game out west, you know the morning starts way before the sun, and usually in the kind of cold where every breath hangs in the air like a little cloud, giving away your position. My routine is simple. Boots, layers, pack, and Killshot coffee in the thermos. There's something about that first hot sip at the tailgate, headlamp on, fingers thawed out, where your brain finally switches from why am I awake to okay, let's go get 'em. If you want a solid cup of coffee for those early starts, scouting days, glassing sessions, or maybe just a Monday pretending to be on the mountain, check out Killshot Coffee. The link is in the show notes, and use code HSP5 for 5% off. Hey hunters, have you ever had one of those stories, the ones that you didn't want to tell, the ones that end in failure? Yeah, I've been there. Actually, you know what? The culprit for me usually is bad optics, or worse, lack of using my optics at all. Picture this. I spot a trophy buck, or an antelope, or an elk, whatever it may be. My heart is racing, with the blurry view, or I just can't quite identify exactly what I'm looking at. It has me second guessing. Well, that's where Vortex Optics comes in. With crystal clear glass and rugged durability, Vortex gives you the confidence to take the shot. Don't let poor optics ruin your story. Make every moment count. Upgrade to Vortex and turn your hunting tales into triumphs. Visit vortexoptics.com today. Idaho Fish and Game is proposing a strategy combining translocation and lethal removal of about 100 non-migratory elk on private land west of Emmett, aimed at reducing ag damage that the agency says exceeds over $1 million in the area. This herd is described as year-round and centered on private ground, meaning the usual they'll migrate back to the public timber fix isn't working. The agency's framing it is straight-up damage control, reduce losses, reduce conflict, and keep the broader elk story from turning into a political bonfire. The hard truth? Translocation is expensive, logistically hard, and not always successful. So agencies often blend options when pressure from landowners is high. This matters because this is the eternal Western Triangle: wildlife numbers, private land tolerance, and public opportunity. If landowners lose patience, everybody loses access and social license. Those elk found the one food plot with unlimited groceries, and it came with a property tax bill. Update from last week: the Wyoming Corner Crossing Clarification Bill advanced, but as it heads towards the Senate, opposition is focusing on whether state trust lands should be treated differently. Ranching groups are pushing for carve-outs or changes. This matters because the whole point of corner crossing is solving checkerboard access without stepping on private land. But state trust lands add a separate layer. They're public-ish, but manage to generate revenue, often via leases. If the bill gets loaded up with exclusions, hunters could end up with a corner crossing except when you really need to outcome. On the flip side, if it steamrolls legitimate lease and management concerns, it can create backlash that slows everything down. So checkerboard access is the only place where a right angle can start a fist fight. Reporting indicates Colorado Parks and Wildlife has recommended approval of over $700,000 in 2025 for wolf depredation claims, roughly matching or exceeding what many documents describe as the state's compensation fund scale. CPW's compensation framework covers direct losses and, in some cases, broader production impacts depending on the circumstance and the program rules. None of this is simple math, and that's exactly the point. Wolf policy fights often become budget fights the moment checks get big enough to show up in these committee hearings. This matters because where wolves sit on the landscape changes elk behavior, calf recruitment, and how people feel about wildlife agencies. Where wolves sit in the budget changes how much oxygen is left for everything else. Wolves don't just move elk, they move line items. California officials approve a plan allowing the Catalina Island Conservancy to eradicate roughly 1,800 non-native mule deer over several years as part of a broader ecosystem restoration push. Supporters argue the deer are hammering native vegetation and driving erosion and fire risk dynamics, and that the full removal is necessary for long-term recovery. Critics, sometimes including hunters and animal rights groups, for totally different reasons, say the methods and the eradication goal are too extreme. The Conservancy's restoration work plan describes the multi-year approach and the broader habitat goals tied to invasive species management. This is a case study in how introduced for hunting can become removed for restoration. It's also a reminder, if we want hunting to remain a management tool, we've got to defend it as a science-based tool, not just a tradition. Catalina deer, introduced for hunting, now they're getting uninvited from the island group chat. Louisiana. Felon allegedly carrying a live alligator down Bourbon Street. In a story that feels like it was written by a sleep-deprived game warden, Louisiana agents arrested a convicted felon who allegedly had a firearm and a live alligator in the French Quarter during Mardi Gras crowds. Yes, wildlife laws are real. Yes, people still test them. No, you should not transport reptiles like they are Mardi Gras bead necklaces. If your night ends with, and the alligator got involved, you've made some choices. That's it for the Hunting Stories podcast, the Hunter's Brief for the week of February 27th. If you want links to every story and source, they're in the show notes. And if you've got a local regulation change or a poaching case or access issue or a wildlife headline that you think that we should cover next week, please do send it in. Don't forget about our Monday. We'll be back with our full Hunting Story episode, because the only thing better than a good policy is a good camp story. Preferably one, of course, that ends with everyone still friends and nobody losing a tailgate. Until next time, hunt ethically, speak up for habitat, and take a minute to keep our public lands public. Have you ever glassed a ridge for an hour and realized you're basically staring at a rock? You've earned a great cup of coffee. And if you've ever chased big game out west, you know the morning starts way before the sun, and usually in the kind of cold where every breath hangs in the air like a little cloud, giving away your position. My routine is simple: boots, layers, pack, and Killshot coffee in the thermos. There's something about that first hot sip at the tailgate, headlamp on, fingers thawed out, where your brain finally switches from why am I awake to okay, let's go get 'em. If you want a solid cup of coffee for those early starts, scouting days, glassing sessions, or maybe just a Monday pretending to be on the mountain, check out Killshot Coffee. The link is in the show notes, and use code HSP5 for 5% off.